84 years ago this week, Nazi tanks rolled across the border into Poland. That invasion led to the worst war in history. Europe and the Pacific were devastated. More than 50 million people perished. Our next guest tells a story about her cousin. He was hiding out from the Nazis in his neighbor's cellar as the Nazis invaded. And his name is Holocaust survivor Sam Ron. His story is told in the new book, Jews in the Garden. It's written by his cousin, award-winning author Judy Rakowsky, and she joins us now. Sam was about 15 at the time when all this happened. So what did you find out about what he witnessed as the Nazis invaded his town?
That picture he had looking out that cellar window, seeing Panzer tanks rolling along and leveling, just steamrolling across the famed Polish cavalry, was something that was seared into his mind for ever since. And Poland, as you know, fell quickly to that blitzkrieg by the Nazis. And Sam went on to live not too different of a life in his small town for a short while. But the Jewish population swelled from some 350 to 550 because a lot of people fled the big cities thinking they could find refuge in small towns.
But that didn't happen, and I know that your cousin, Sam Ron, is a Holocaust survivor, and he was even in the Krakow ghetto and then several Nazi concentration camps. So I can't begin to imagine what life was like for him. He was robbed of his late teen years, his early adult life, but he escaped death. So how did he get through it all?
People were always speaking gloom and doom. They were saying, when he was in 4 different camps, and they actually snuck into the Krakow ghetto. And his story is one of incredible resilience and optimism. And he would say that people in the camps would be saying, we're all going to die tomorrow. I heard that we're going to, this, that, or the other was going to happen. And he would walk away from them. And he said, why, if I'm going to die tomorrow, should I start dying today? So I think that's a really interesting perspective on a man that compartmentalized, and he'd say, like, why worry ahead? He'll deal with it when it happens. And that's one of the big takeaways that's affected me.
So he really tried to remain positive, and I'm sure as a Jew he had strong faith in God, and I'm sure that had an effect on his attitude. So I know in chapter 7 of your book, it's got the same name, by the way, as the book, Jews in the Garden. Who were the Jews in the garden?
Well, first, I should say that the title has 2 meanings, because Poland was a garden for Jews for nearly 1,000 years. And, Jews had an incredible life there with civil rights given to them in medieval times. And there was a lot of thriving. Of course, we know that the Holocaust put an end to that. And we came upon a farm where there was a woman who said that our family of cousins, they were the doulas that lived, a few doors down from where Sam grew up. They wound up murdered and buried in this former root cellar. And this woman of about 30 was on the outskirts of an interview about this with the man who had, the righteous people that had tried to save them and harbored this family for 18 months. And she said, oh, I never knew this. This was her own uncle speaking. And she said, I grew up and kids at school teased me about the Jews in the garden. And she said they teased me and they called me doula. So that was something that really stuck with me, and that became the title of the book.
Judy, the book at times seems like a murder mystery, and I know you detail the persistent search for family members, especially Sam's precious cousin, Henna. Tell us about her, and why was it so difficult to learn of her fate?
Well, that's a great question, because when I first traveled with Sam, I went to Poland with Sam 9 times. And on our first trip in 1991, not long after communism fell, Sam had been welcomed with open arms by former neighbors and people who had done business with his family. And then when after someone gave him the tip that this henna had survived, when he tried to pursue it, people shut down. And they just said, I don't know. And they turn away and, look down and away in a very evasive fashion, as someone who's a career journalist, that I've observed the way people react. Anyway, we chased all over the place trying to find this living survivor, someone he knew, who he'd seen every day when he was growing up. And we got this resistance, and we did not know why. Why wouldn't they want him to have a reunion with his cousin? So it turns out that the reason was that the killers were Poles, or members of the underground, who were off the grid, shall we say, because the underground, the partisans in Poland, were actually very helpful to the Allies and did a lot of great things.
Well, let me get into that just and take this approach. Poland's a NATO ally leading the resistance to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but I know you contend the Polish government is rewriting history by hiding its involvement and the involvement of its citizens with Nazi crimes during the Holocaust. So what are officials there doing to bury the truth beyond what you've experienced?
Well, Poland passed a law in 2018 that made it illegal to say that Poles were complicit in any way in the Holocaust. Now, I want to be clear. Poles were not collaborators, unlike France and other countries. The Polish government in exile was an ally, and Poland was resistant to the Nazis in many, many ways. But some people did bad things. And there is a sense of need to have a purely positive narrative that no one did anything that wasn't pure. And it's not that we have anything, to say against Poland, but we just did discover how relatives were murdered, and it was by Poles. So those are just the facts. I'm not trying to paint anyone with a broad brush.
Well, of course, there was a law passed in 2018 that restricts criticism of Poles and their potential or possible role in the Nazi persecution there. What about that?
Exactly. That's the problem, is that the truth that we discovered is illegal to discuss. And, there's a difference between trying to, paint with a broad brush Poles or anything. We have wonderful relationships and connections there. And I admire many, many things that are happening in Poland. But unfortunately, what we discovered about what happened to several families of our relatives was that they died at the hands of Poles during the war. And these were sort of renegade partisans. And it's an unfortunate fact that is not really allowed to be discussed in Poland today.
Okay, may God bring the truth to light. It's an amazing story of survival and tenacious efforts to uncover the truth. The book is Jews in the Garden. Author Judy Rakowsky, thank you for being with us. May God continue to bless you and Sam with many more years to share this incredible story.
Thank you so much.